Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming and joining in today to talk about hummingbirds and hummingbird communication. I'm a PhD candidate in the Neuroscience Institute at Georgia State, and I am studying some really interesting vocalizations that hummingbirds produce. So I will be telling you a little bit about hummingbird communication and a little bit about the vocalizations that I study. So to start, I want to give you a cool fact about this hummingbird that we have here in the cover. It is the Ecuadorian hill star. It is one of the hummingbirds that I study, and it is found mostly in Ecuador. And one cool fact that really got me when I first learned about the existence of this hummingbird is that it can live up to 17,000 feet above sea level. So I could not wrap my head around the idea that a tiny bird like a hummingbird could live so high in the mountains. So as soon as I learned about this, I decided I wanted to go check it out. And from then on, I have been working with this hummingbird for more than 5 years already. So this is often where you will find the hummingbird. So in the back, we have Mount Chimborazo, one of the highest mountains in Ecuador. And this is one of the field sites in which I usually work at. So oftentimes I will be found in these really remote places, chasing and searching for this beautiful hummingbird, which is also a very interesting hummingbird. But usually hummingbirds captivates us for many different reasons. So they come in all sizes. We have the tiny bee hummingbird compared to the giant hummingbird that weighs 10 times more than the bee hummingbird, around 20 grams, compared to the bee hummingbird that is only 2 grams. And when we see the giant hummingbird, if you ever have the opportunity to see the giant hummingbird flying, it's funny because it looks like a hummingbird flying in slow motion. So giant hummingbirds beat their wings at about 25 times per second, while the average hummingbird will beat their wings at about 75 times per second. They also come with all fancy decorations and adaptations, like the sword-bill hummingbird, which has the longest bill of all hummingbirds, and then the tiny thornbill hummingbirds that usually have really tiny bills. And of course, they always captivate us with their beauty, with their beautiful feathers, and also their flashy, iridescent plumage. So beyond all of these things, I hope that today I can show you also that hummingbird communication is also very interesting, that they also show very unique features when they are communicating, and that involves complex social interactions. So we're going to start with a small clip from the Anna's hummingbird that really captivates the idea of hummingbird communication. Yeah. So I'm going to move it a little bit towards the point where we want to focus.
It's up, but the choice of
about here. So that's a male hummingbird, and the female is perched.
He moves in close, hovering directly in front of her, rocking his entire body back and forth in a display of flying prowess. Though his back shimmers with green, it's not until we get her point of view that we see his true splendor. He flexes the iridescent feathers of his mantle until they become a glowing mask of violet. Facing into the blazing sun, he swoops back and forth, his face a fiery flower before her. How can she possibly resist him? And yet she does, leaving him to return to his perch.
So this video is really interesting because it is showing us both perspectives, not only the perspective of the male, which is making these beautiful displays towards the female, but also the perspective of the female. And this is really important because often we tend to think, or at least at some point in science, we used to think of females as passive individuals who are basically waiting to mate with a male, and the male as the active member of this partnership or of this social interaction. And the reality is that females, or the receiver of any communication interaction, usually is a very active part. So for instance, we have the sender, which is the one that produces the signal, and these signals carries information, but the receiver is the one who will actively evaluate the signals, and then it will make a decision as to whether respond or not to the signal that they are perceiving. So I really like this video because it's showing both sides, right? The sender and this male that is making this beautiful display, but the female, which is also evaluating the display and making a decision. So why do hummingbirds communicate? We need to think of communication as a means to facilitate, promote, and sometimes even deter social interactions. And communication itself is a social interaction. Because there is always an intended receiver, although it may not be in the surroundings or very close to the individual that is sending the signal. So communication is important in all sorts of aspects of social behavior, such as territoriality and aggression, spanning all the way to the other side, to courtship and breeding, as we just saw with the Anna's hummingbird. And now I'm going to show you a short clip on the Bobtail coronet, which is another hummingbird that I also study in Ecuador. And in this clip, it is producing its high-pitched calls, and it is a territorial signal. So this hummingbird is perched at its favorite perch within its territory, and it's producing this call constantly throughout the day. So you will see that although there are not close contact interactions, there are intended receivers, and there are neighbors in that area which are supposed to hear this call and know that this male is defending this territory. Yeah, and one thing that I should say is that actually in the Bobtail coronet, we cannot tell the males from the females apart based on the plumage. So it is possible that this is actually a female that is also defending her territory, which can also happen in the tropics, that females are also aggressive and females also hold their own territories. So usually what would happen is that if this territorial call is not enough to prevent other individuals from coming to the territory, then this hummingbird will escalate in aggression. And with that, they will also adjust their calls so that they will sing louder, they will also sing at a higher pitch, and they will sing faster. So the intervals between each note will be even shorter. And that you can see as the aggression escalates, how these changes occur in the vocalization of this hummingbird. So context and social context matters a lot when they are communicating. And not only that, but sometimes some species of hummingbirds also have very specific vocalizations that they will use for different social contexts. For example, having one specific vocalization for aggressive encounters. And that is the case of the Ecuadorian hill star that we have on the right. So that picture is of a male Ecuadorian hill star, and at that moment in the picture, the male is taking off to chase off another hummingbird that probably came into his territory. And while they are doing that, they also produce while flying a chasing call, which is more elaborate and also complex and very loud vocalization. And you're going to hear it now. So they are producing this vocalization while they are flying. And this is the most aggressive song that they have in the vocal repertoire that they exhibit. So now I'm going to show you a different video. In this video, we have a female on the right, that is the one in green, and then we have two juvenile males that are begging for food to their mother. So you will see begging calls that are intended to call the attention of the mother, and actually females are very, very sensitive to these vocalizations. And then on the other side, you will see the use of this chasing call and this aggressive song in the context of competing for resources between the two siblings. So these two juveniles are already out of the nest. However, even when they are outside of the nest, they will constantly go back to their mother to beg for food until they are very big. So you can see in this video that these two juveniles are almost as big or even bigger, slightly bigger than their mother. So in this video, we can see how they are using different calls for different purposes. And that is also the beauty of vocal communication in hummingbirds and in general communication, is that sometimes in the past it was thought that hummingbirds will make these very simple calls and that they will all of them will sound like more or less the same. But now we know that actually they are complex. They are very interesting, all the sounds that hummingbirds produce, and that they involve complex social interactions. So I studied the high-pitched calls in hummingbirds. And to illustrate this, or to show you why this is interesting, these vocalizations are interesting, I'm going to start with the Carolina wren. So this is a bird that we all know, very familiar to all of us here in Georgia. And this is how the song sounds like, also a very familiar sound. So here we have a spectrogram. This is a cool tool that we use to study vocalizations and sounds in general. So this is a visual representation of sound, which is fascinating to me, the fact that we can actually see sound. And what we have in the x-axis is time, and on the y-axis we have the frequency or the pitch at which these vocalizations are produced. And the intensity of these red coloration is showing us how loud these vocalizations are and how much energy the bird is putting into each note. So we're going to listen to the Carolina wren vocalization once again, now trying to follow the notes on the spectrogram. Okay. So on the other hand, we have the Ecuadorian hill star. And beyond the vocalizations that I already showed you, we found a really weird sound that this hummingbird was producing. I'm going to play it once again. So at the beginning, it was even hard for us to actually identify it until it took us a lot of time to learn the sound and actually so that it's easy for us to find it and identify it in the wild. And when we look at the spectrogram of this sound, this is what we see. One more thing before I show you is that in the spectrogram, in the frequencies on the left, I'm showing you from about 200 hertz from very low, almost 0 hertz, all the way to 20K or 20 kilohertz. That is the full auditory spectrum for humans. So now let's see how the vocalization from the Ecuadorian hill star looks like. And this is how it looks like. So it is much higher pitched than the vocalization of the Carolina wren and compared to the vocalizations of most birds that we know of. When we look at the scientific evidence, we find that songbirds, at least, most of them vocalize within the range of 2 and 6 kilohertz. So everything between these two black lines that we have here in the spectrogram. So what is the big fuss about this, right? So far, or until we found these, we were not sure or we didn't know that birds in general could produce or hear high-pitched vocalizations, not at least this high as the one the Ecuadorian hill star is producing. So again, here we have an schematic showing us the different auditory ranges at which different animals can hear. And from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz or 20 kilohertz, we have the human auditory field. So that is the best hearing sensitivity that any human can have. Usually when they are babies, when we are babies or little kids, as we grow older, we tend to lose sensitivity to the higher frequencies. So anything that is closer to 20 kilohertz, it will be harder and harder for us to hear. And then any sound that falls below the 20 hertz threshold for us is called an infrasound. And elephants and moles, they can hear these sounds and they can actually communicate using these sounds. And then beyond 20,000 hertz, we have ultrasounds. So our cats and dogs, they usually hear everything or most of the things that we can hear, but they are also sensitive to sounds that we cannot perceive. And similar thing with bats and dolphins, which actually communicate using ultrasonic vocalizations. And here are the birds. So this is the frequency, this is the range in which most birds, based on all the scientific evidence that we have, can hear. But if we consider the different songs and calls that the Ecuadorian hill star produces, then, and we assume that, or we think that they could hear these songs, this would be the range in which the Ecuadorian hill star should be able to hear. So we found that that 4 species of hummingbirds are producing these high-pitched sounds. So you already saw a clip of the Bobtail cornet. So among the producers of high-pitched calls, this one is the one that produces the lowest pitch, the lowest high-pitched song. And then we have the speckled hummingbird and the violet-tailed sylph, which are also producing these territorial calls, usually perched on their favorite perch. They will start making these calls to defend their territory. And then the Ecuadorian hill star, which we have seen that it has a really cool behavior. So one thing that we need to know about the Ecuadorian hill star is, as you saw from the previous clip, the males and the females look different, so it's easy for us to actually distinguish them. And one thing that we have observed is that in the Ecuadorian hill star, the males and the females hold separate territories, and usually the males are a little bit higher up in the mountain, and the females are closer to streams and a little bit lower elevation, so that those are also their nesting places, usually with slightly better weather conditions. So what we have seen is that when the Ecuadorian hill star is in its own territory, so the males are in their own territory, they will make the high frequency song while they are perching on their favorite perches, just like the other hummingbirds. So they are defending their territory. They are letting other hummingbirds around know that that perch and that flower or that patch of flowers is theirs. However, when they go to the females' territories, the females are as aggressive or sometimes even more aggressive than the males. So the females are the ones who control the territories and the resources, and they are also the ones who are perching high on these perches of this beautiful flower, which is called the Chukirawa flower. So what the males do is that the males go down to the female territories to court the females. Um, and when they are courting the females, what they will do is that they will hover in front of the female, um, slightly similar to the Anna's hummingbird video that we saw at the beginning. However, they are not waving to the sides. They are just hovering in front of the female. And at the same time, they are producing this high frequency song. So if we pay attention to this picture of this Ecuadorian hill star, we see that the feathers on the cheeks, on the side of the heads, they are flared up. And when they are producing the song, they also extend their neck towards the front and they inflate the throat. And when this happens, there is like a wave of iridescence that is shown to the female as they are hovering in front of the female. So we have a behavior that is complex in terms of the signals that it is producing. So they are producing sound, and at the same time, they are also creating this visual effect for the female, just like we saw with the Anna's hummingbird. Um, and also, what we have found is that there is a lot of diversity in the high-pitched call, high-pitched song of the Ecuadorian hill star. So this is a map of Ecuador, and we sampled songs from many different locations where this hummingbird is found, and we started to find a lot of diversity between these among these populations. So to the human ear, these differences are almost imperceptible, really. I am not able to distinguish these vocalizations just by listening to them, except for the one on the far lower left corner, which is really, really long compared to all of the other vocalizations. So that caught my attention the first time I heard this sound. But beyond that, I hear them all, and I recognize it's a high pitched song, but I cannot tell which one it is until we look at these spectrograms and we see how different they are. The beautiful thing is that from other scientific studies on birds, we know that birds are very sensitive to these differences and to these fine details in the vocalizations that birds produce. So some things that for us are imperceptible, for them are really meaningful differences that they will be able to pick up in the field. Yeah, so now the ruby-throated hummingbird, right? So this is our beloved hummingbird here in Georgia. And also it is the only hummingbird that breeds on the eastern United States. So with the ruby-throated hummingbird, we see that it has this beautiful courgette, red courgette, that they also use to in their courtship displays towards the female. So on the left, we have a picture of the ruby-throated, and on the right, we have a schematic, a drawing showing the shuttle display. So this is one of the two displays that the males will do to the females. So the video on the Anna's hummingbird was actually a shuttle display. So this is a display in which the males will fly on the sides of the female towards left and right while making sounds or while showing them the beautiful feathers and the iridescent plumage in their heads. So here we have the shuttle display, and this male hummingbird is usually moving from right to left. And then I place these letters, the T and the B. So those are the places in which the ruby-throated hummingbird is making sounds. So the B stands for vocalization. So they are making vocalizations when they are right in front of the female, but they are also making tail sounds. And that is another cool fact about hummingbirds, that they produce sound not only with their vocal organ, but they also produce sounds with the tails and the feathers of their wings, which are called sonations. So here we see the complexity of the displays that the males are making and all of the features that the females are evaluating when deciding whether the male they have in front has a good quality to decide that they want to mate with this male. So we have an spatial component because the male hummingbird is moving in a space with respect to the female, and that movement matters. Also, we have acoustic signals, both vocalizations and also tail sounds. And then we have the visual effect of the ruby gorget on the in front of the female, when they are right in front of the female. And also the timing of how these different components of the display are presented is really important as well, because the feathers will only vibrate and make sound under certain conditions. So the male hummingbird needs to make sure that they actually match those conditions, those physical properties, so that the feathers can vibrate and produce the sound. I couldn't find a video of the ruby-throated hummingbird making the shuttle display, but I will show you a video on the blotching hummingbird, which is the sister species of the ruby-throated. So what we will see here is from the perspective of below. So what we have on top is a female in a cage. I do not recommend anyone to catch a female and put it on a cage. This was made under very controlled and conditions for research purposes, so that we can actually see and appreciate the details and the beauty of these displays from the males. So inside the cage, we have the female, and right outside is the male trying to display and court this female. So you can see from this video that how is it that they are producing the sounds right when they are in front, at least the tail sounds when they are right in front of the female. And also how the female has to be really alert and really paying attention to every movement that this hummingbird is making really fast. So they also have other types of display, which are called the dive displays. And what I'm showing you here on the left is each one of these traces is one display from one species of hummingbird in North America. And I wanted to show you this image just because I want you to see the beauty and the diversity of these displays. If we were to look at the sounds that they are producing, the sounds are sometimes very different as well. Different in pitch, sometimes different in the notes or the shape of the notes, if we were to look at these sounds in the spectrogram. And also, sometimes even the elevation that these hummingbirds need to reach to be able to make this display. Because usually they will make sounds when they are at the lowest point of the displays. And this has to do again with the properties of the feathers. So each of these species have specialized or very specific types of feathers or with variations, so that they can make the sounds that are appropriate for these dive displays when they are courting the females. And I'm going to focus here on these two because this is the ruby-throated hummingbird and the blotching hummingbird. So when we see here, there are differences between these two sister species, although sometimes we as humans tend to sometimes confuse the two species. I am pretty sure that these females are much better than us to distinguishing which male is their own species. And what we see here is the W means the wing sounds. So these are the places where the wing sounds are produced. And then at the lowest point in the dive, these gray bars are showing the points in which they are making the tail sounds. So if we were going to use the same graph as before, let's imagine now that this hummingbird is not moving from side to side, but it's moving in a U-shape way, in a U-shaped dive. And when it reaches the lowest point, it has reached enough speed to vibrate the tails and produce the tail sounds. At the same time, at that position, the female will be able to see the iridescent ruby gorget of the ruby-throated hummingbird when it is right in front of her. So I'm going to show you a small clip on the diversity of these behaviors, just for you to appreciate how these subtle differences can matter a lot for the females. So in this one, again, it's not the ruby-throated, but we will see some shadow displays from different species of hummingbirds here in North America. Here I say that this hummingbird, this Costas hummingbird, is actually producing a high-pitched song. Yeah, so from these videos, we saw how each of them have their own iridescent plumage, but they also have their own sounds and their own way in which they move to court the female. And these are really important. Just a few weeks ago, a study came out on the broad-tailed hummingbird showing how is it that they are timing the presentation of these different signals, the dive display, the sounds, and the coloration in their throats. So I hope that with this I've shown you that hummingbird communication and that their social interactions are very complex. And also the fact that when we are thinking of communication, we should not only think about the signaler or the beautiful male that is producing these displays, but also we need to think of the females as the ones who evaluate the quality of these displays and actually the ones making the decision of what is the next move in the social interaction. So with this, I would like to give a big shout out to Science for Georgia. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you everyone for joining in and to talk about hummingbirds. Again, thanks to Science for Georgia for creating these spaces, which are really important, I think, to share the science and the knowledge that we have with the public. I really enjoyed it. I want to thank my PIs at Georgia State, my collaborators here in the United States and in Ecuador, and of course my undergrad and field assistants, because without them I wouldn't be able to carry out my work, and my funding sources that support my research. So without further ado, if you have any questions, I am more than happy. Thank you so much.